Now, for Irfan and Tom, I guess you're on the opposite end of the spectrum because you've got a lot more constraints you're under. Irfan, can you comment about the financial services industry and how it deals with these types of things?
Yeah, I mean, most of the companies in the financial services are very conservative when it comes to using these kinds of tools. I mean, most of these sites are blocked. I mean, at Moody's, we actually don't even have the capability to use AIIM. So, I mean, they're very restrictive. But what's interesting is a couple of years ago, we restructured our business. So we have our traditional ratings business, which, you know, for those who are not in the financial sector, is the equivalent of providing FICO score, like you have FICO scores for individuals. Moody's provides the equivalent of a FICO score for companies, governments, and institutions. So that's been our bread and butter for 100 years. And they recently created a separate business unit, which is our analytics business unit. And that takes a lot of the credit data that we provide and then repackages it. But it also happens to be the area where we've done the most acquisitions in the technology space. So we own 2 software companies, which is a bit unusual there. And when you start getting into that space, it automatically starts forcing these kinds of issues. So we've seen definitely more adoption in our analytics business unit in terms of heading towards more of the Web 2.0. It's not as regulated as the rating side of the business, but it's applying pressure there. So we're beginning to see changes.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, have any of you actually brought the E2O collaboration capabilities into a formal business process as part of like a finance or ERP system or something?
Our CRM, as far as prospect and recruiting admissions, is all incorporates Facebook and other mechanisms to communicate to our students, YouTube, etc.
So jumping to a totally different subject, Irfan, Tom, as more and more information is getting put into these departmental file sharing types of systems, you've got to be looking at the question of how do you deal with that, how you consolidate that information. How are you doing that?
I want to say, you know, we've totally got our arms around that just yet. It's as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of different pocket installations between all the different tools we have. You know, still tons of shared folders that everyone stores things on. But definitely headed more towards cloud computing again in our analytics business. What the data are, we definitely are looking to consolidate our tools. So I think we're probably at the very beginning part of that curve of trying to formulate a strategy before we start executing.
How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I think we try to separate maybe into 2 different areas. One is the shared file systems, and the other is multiple repositories. So where we've got similar multiple repositories in content management space, a good example is a recent merger that we did. The acquisition actually had 12 different repositories. We run 4 enterprise repositories. So we were able to merge those 12 repositories, of which 3 were outsourced, into our 4. So when you think about doing that, right, it's, you've got standard control, you've got better access controls, you've got your security controls, you have 12 less audits that have to be done in the field, you've got 12 less refreshes that have to be done every 4 or 5 years. You've got much better control over that whole environment when you've got less repositories. And besides which it saves a ton of money. The other side, though, the shared file systems, I think becomes a little bit more concerning because we are very structured in what we put into our enterprise content management repository. So, we know that when a document goes in there, it has to be stored for 7 years post-account closing. When you think about what people put on shared file systems, it reminds me a lot of the early days of email, right? It has this potential to just go viral on you. So, what's 100 gig today or 100 terabytes today, 10 years from now, when you start adding in some collaboration tools like SharePoint and LiveLink and some of the other collaboration tools, you start including things like Word documents, Excel documents, and the multiple iterations. Who controls that, right? When something goes into an archive, how long does it have to stay there? The person who put it there leaves the company, who's going to, and we do cost allocation, who pays for that for the next 7 years, 10 years, 30 years? It's not defined. So, I think that we've got to get, and actually Monica was talking about this last night, is I think it's a mindset that we've got to get a change that when people put a document away, they have to think about, 5 years from now, and somebody's looking for a document on this analysis, right? How will they find it, right? How will they recognize my name in the convention, which is absolutely meaningless to anybody except for me? So I think that we have to go into that with our eyes open. I think we have to understand it. I don't think we want to make some of the same mistakes that we've done before, where we just allow people to willy-nilly throw a bunch of things into a storage repository, into a system, and 5 years later we go back and say, how do we deal with that? Because that's too late to figure it out. So you kind of at that point have to take a go forward approach. So we're looking at that. We all agree, right? You can get advantages through deduping, cheaper storage, fewer systems, fewer audits, fewer operational procedures. All those things are great benefits. So conceptually, motherhood and apple pie. Right? We should have standard places that we can put things and have better controls over them. But the reality is, I think it's a little harder to do it, and we've got to figure that out going forward.